The chemistry between them had been undeniable during the long night journey. Stolen glances, whispered conversations, a connection neither had felt in years. But as the train pulled into the station and she saw his wife waiting on the platform, Catherine knew the mysterious stranger who'd awakened her heart was about to destroy it. New Mexico territory. Late summer of 1885, the midnight train from Santa Fe to Albuquerque carried its usual cargo of secrets, dreams, and desperate souls seeking fresh starts under cover of darkness. Among the passengers in the dimly lit first-class car sat Catherine Whitmore, a woman whose beauty was matched only by the sadness in her emerald eyes. At 26, Catherine had everything society claimed a woman should want: a wealthy husband, a grand house in Santa Fe's most prestigious district, and a social position that opened every door. What she didn't have was love, passion, or even basic kindness from the man who'd married her for her father's railroad connections 3 years ago. She'd boarded the train impulsively, using her maiden name and wearing her simplest dress, desperate for a few hours away from the suffocating walls of her marriage. The plan was simple: ride to Albuquerque, spend the night in a hotel, and return on the morning train before her husband noticed her absence. She hadn't planned on him. Thomas Garrett sat 3 seats ahead, his tall frame silhouetted against the window as he watched the moonlit landscape roll past. Even in the dim lighting, Catherine could see the strength in his shoulders, the way his dark hair caught the occasional flicker of lamplight. He wore a simple black suit that spoke of modest means but good taste, and there was something in his posture that suggested both weariness and resolve. When the train jolted suddenly, throwing Catherine forward, it was Thomas who steadied her with strong, gentle hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep and warm, his gray eyes filled with genuine concern. "No, I'm fine," Catherine stammered, acutely aware of how his hands lingered on her arms for just a moment longer than propriety demanded. "These night trains can be unpredictable," Thomas said, settling back into his seat but turning slightly toward her. "First time traveling alone?" Catherine hesitated. In her real life, she never traveled alone, never spoke to strangers, never did anything without her husband's approval. But here, in the anonymous darkness of the midnight train, she felt a freedom she hadn't experienced since girlhood. "Yes," she lied smoothly. "I'm Catherine Reynolds." The false surname rolled off her tongue easier than expected. "Thomas Garrett," he replied, and when he smiled, Catherine felt something flutter in her chest that had been dormant for years. As the miles rolled beneath the train's wheels, their conversation flowed with an ease that surprised them both. Thomas spoke of his work as a territorial surveyor, the wild beauty of the landscapes he'd mapped, the loneliness of a job that kept him traveling for months at a time. Catherine found herself sharing stories from her youth, her love of reading, her dreams of seeing the world beyond New Mexico's borders. "What brings you to Albuquerque?" Thomas asked as the train swayed gently through a curve. Catherine glanced down at her hands, suddenly aware that she'd removed her wedding ring and tucked it into her purse before boarding. "I needed to get away. Sometimes a woman needs to remember who she is when no one else is watching." Thomas studied her face in the lamplight, noting the sadness that flickered behind her smile. "Running from something or running to something?" "I'm not sure there's a difference anymore," Catherine replied honestly. Their conversation continued through the night, moving from safe topics to deeper waters. Thomas spoke of his late wife, how consumption had taken her 2 years ago, leaving him alone with memories and work that no longer felt meaningful. Catherine found herself describing the suffocation of a life lived according to others' expectations, though she was careful not to mention her marriage directly. As dawn approached, their words became softer, more intimate. When the train swayed around a particularly sharp curve, Catherine's hand brushed against Thomas's on the armrest between them. Neither pulled away. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking for years," Catherine whispered, "and tonight is the first time I've been awake." "I know exactly what you mean," Thomas replied, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you who you really are." The connection between them was electric, undeniable. In the intimate darkness of the train car, with other passengers dozing and the world outside reduced to shadows and starlight, it felt as though they were the only two people in existence. "When we reach Albuquerque," Thomas said quietly, would you like to have breakfast with me? I know a little cafe near the station." Catherine's heart raced. She thought of her empty house in Santa Fe, her cold marriage bed, the life that felt more like a prison with each passing day. "I'd like that very much." But as the train began to slow, approaching Albuquerque's station platform, Catherine saw them through the window. Families waiting to greet arriving passengers, couples embracing, children running to grandparents. And there, near the far end of the platform, stood a woman in a blue traveling dress, her blonde hair neatly pinned, her face scanning the train windows with anxious anticipation. Catherine's blood went cold as she watched Thomas's expression change. His face lit up with joy and something that looked very much like love as he spotted the woman on the platform. "My wife," he said softly, more to himself than to Catherine. "She wasn't supposed to be here until next week." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Wife. Of course he had a wife. Men like Thomas Garrett, kind, handsome, passionate, didn't travel through life alone. She looked down at her own hands, at the pale band of skin where her wedding ring usually sat, and felt the crushing weight of hypocrisy. "She's beautiful," Catherine managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Thomas turned to her, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Catherine, No," she interrupted gently. "Don't say anything. Please." The train shuddered to a stop, and the sounds of arrival filled the car, passengers gathering their belongings, porters calling out stops, the hiss of steam from the engine. Through the window, Catherine watched as Thomas's wife moved closer to the train, her face bright with expectation. Thomas stood slowly, gathering his travel bag. He looked down at Catherine, who remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant for—" "Neither did I," Catherine replied. "Go to her. She's been waiting." Thomas hesitated for a moment longer, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Catherine's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, "for reminding me what it feels like to be alive." After he left, Catherine sat alone in the emptying train car, watching through the window as Thomas embraced his wife on the platform. The woman's face glowed with happiness, and Thomas held her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and exactly what Catherine knew she would never have. She reached into her purse and slipped her wedding ring back onto her finger, the gold band feeling heavier than ever. In a few hours, she would board the return train to Santa Fe, go back to her cold house and loveless marriage, and pretend that this night had never happened. But as she finally stood to leave the train, Catherine carried with her something precious, the memory of feeling truly alive, of connecting with another soul, of remembering that beneath the roles and expectations and compromises, she was still a woman capable of passion and joy. The midnight train had given her a glimpse of who she could be, even if it had also shown her everything she could never have.